Hooyboer Winklaar.
Good morning. Wow. Welcome to the 6th International Women's Day Conference. And I would like to first start off by also extending a warm welcome to the Governor of Aruba, to the President of Parliament, to members of Parliament, to our international guests, and to all of you this bright morning. Thank you for being here. I am especially excited about this event today because I think that the women that we have speaking to you today are all of them going to impact each and every one of us in a very profound way. And really that's what this event is all about, to celebrate, to reflect, to inspire, and to recommit ourselves towards one common goal. And that is that one day, you and I, our mothers, our sisters, our daughters, our granddaughters, all women everywhere, will not know a life of disadvantage, of discrimination, of violence, simply because they are women. And really that is what this day has always been dedicated about. Last year I had the opportunity to talk at the Women's Conference about the subject shame, and really how unresolved feelings of shame sometimes are keeping women from reaching their full potential. And even how shame is being used as a weapon against women in our society. A very uncomfortable, sometimes very difficult subject to talk about, but one that is necessary because I think we need to use these types of platforms to be able to talk about things that are a little bit difficult, maybe are still taboo, but this is the only way that we kind of take that power away from those subjects. And so this year, I've decided to talk about an even more uncomfortable, controversial, difficult, sometimes negative, even sometimes dark subject. That's right. Today, I'm going to talk to you about politics. Specifically, women in politics. Now, before you start thinking, uh-oh, here she is, she's a politician, she's going to talk about politics, she's going to talk about herself, this is all one big campaign rally. I'm going to let you in on a little secret, but you have to promise not to tell anybody. I will not be participating in the upcoming elections in September. After 2 terms as a minister, I think it's time to pass the baton on to somebody else. And, you know, of course, there's lots of decisions or lots of factors that go into a decision like this, and it's not something that I've made recently. But of all the different reasons, I think that there are really 2 that are most important. And for me, the first is that I never set out to be a career politician. So 2 terms as a minister, I think, is a respectable number of years to do this job. And secondly, and probably the more important reason, is that, you know, the burden of public life on families, and specifically on children, it's very difficult to explain unless you're experiencing it yourself firsthand. But I think my son sums it up really well when he says, "Mom, when are you quitting your job again?" So I'm going to talk about women in politics in general, about, I think, what women's political participation, and specifically women's leadership, and the impact that that can have on shaping this country and countries all over the world. So I think we can all agree that politics is still pretty much a man's game. And the US elections reminded us of that. And as Kermit points out, if Hillary had 5 children from 3 different men, she would not be the Democratic Party leader. I think that that kind of sums it up, the double standard that still exists. And if we look at women in politics around the world, we see that, you know, of all the national parliamentarians, 22% are women. And that may seem like a low number, but the good news is that's up from 11%. The bad news is it's taken us 20 years to double that number. So again, we see the slow progress. In Aruba, that figure is 38%. So we are in fact ahead of the global average. I think we can be proud of that fact, of the progress that we've made in this area. For government ministers, we see that 17% of all ministers around the world are female. And of course, that is lower than 22%. And this is a map where you can see all the places that you can find female ministers and the portfolios that they have, which are still very much skewed to the softer kind of portfolios that you see oftentimes in economic situations as well. In Aruba, we have had, since the introduction of our first cabinet in 1986, 77 minister positions. 77 minister positions. I'm the 5th female minister out of 77. So needless to say, we still have a far way to go to get to gender parity in politics. And in 2009, when I entered politics, I can tell you I had zero idea of what this would be like. You can say I was kind of naive, because I didn't realize that from the moment that you step in to the political arena, the life that you knew is forever changed. You immediately get a lot of friends that you've never met before, and at the same time, probably just as many enemies that you've also never met before. And, you know, I would say in 2009, the political climate was probably a little, slightly less marginalized, slightly more bipartisan, I think, around the world, not just in Aruba. And, well, today's political climate is, you can see, very, very different. You know, there are some advantages to being a female politician, namely that there aren't very many of us, so we kind of stand out a little bit more. Kind of like the rare animals that people line up in the zoo to see. That's a little bit like us. Sometimes we're so rare that people have a hard time identifying us. So in my first year as a minister, and within a few months, I had the opportunity to visit a city, a work trip, and I was with my husband at the time, and we had an opportunity to meet with an ambassador, a Dutch ambassador. I won't name any names. And, you know, we were escorted into his office for a chat and a coffee, and I thought it was a little bit strange that, you know, halfway through the conversation, he wasn't really paying a lot of attention to me. He was more directing a lot of his focus on my husband, and he was asking him a lot of questions. And it wasn't until he asked my husband, "So, Minister Hooyboer, how does it feel to be the minister for the first time?" Did I realize that he thought he was the Minister Hooyboer, not me. And then I had to, of course, very diplomatically correct the misunderstanding and, "Oh, sorry, yes, oh, that's me, I'm Minister Hooyboer." And of course, he was very apologetic and I'm sure a little embarrassed, but to me it was not shocking or surprising, because this is what it's like to be a woman in politics. We are a rare breed indeed. And if you took a survey, even here today, and you asked people, do you think that the political climate could be improved? I'm sure that the overwhelming response would be yes. And even if you ask politicians, they would also tell you, yeah, we would like to see improvements to the way that we do politics. Politics has always had some negative connotation to it, but I think never before has it been this steeped in disenchantment, in cynicism, in negativity and uncertainty around the world. And I think that, you know, politics actually dominates oftentimes the news cycle and water cooler talk like some major disasters do. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not a criticism in any way of any political party or any politician for that matter. And of course, I will always have my own political preferences for my party, AVP. And I think everybody has a fundamental right to have those political beliefs and ideology and be able to express those freely. But this is really a statement about the way in which we engage in politics, the form of political communication, the political climate as a whole. So the question is, how do we do this? How do we make improvements? How do we make these changes? And what role do women play in this? Well, I think women play a major role. More women in politics would mean that it not only changes and affects the political climate, but it also affects the public agenda and public attitudes towards politics as well. So how do we go about doing this? Well, first of all, obviously, we need to have women in politics. Those numbers that I just showed you, we need to improve that. And look at 2013 elections in Aruba. Of all the potential voters, there were 48% that were men and 52% that were female. Of all the candidates, we had 74% that were male and 26% that were female. And of all those female candidates combined, they took away a mere 22% of the vote. So of course, if we increase not only the number of female candidates, but also the number of votes that are going to women, the chances that women would be making it into elected office is much greater. But is that enough to make these changes? Do we need to just throw in more women into the mix and voila, sit back and watch the magic happen? Well, I think certainly we need more women in politics. The numbers show us that without question. But I think we also need to create space in politics for women to not only become women leaders in politics, and I mean leaders not in the sense of a party leader, but women leaders in politics from all different angles and all different positions. Not only women leaders in politics, but also allow women to lead as women. What I mean is, I think that what we need right now in politics and in leadership around the world is a good doses of female leadership style. Yes, somebody agrees with that statement. That's good. What we need to do is allow women to enter, lead as women, and not necessarily feel compelled to emulate a man, to be able to make it and survive in a predominantly male political environment. So those leadership traits, what are they? Kindness, compassion, empathy, emotional intelligence, nurturing spirit, inclusion. Leadership traits that aren't maybe necessarily associated with traditional leadership traits, but nonetheless, I think very necessary to act as an antidote against sometimes the aggressive, the insulting, sometimes mean and downright cruel culture that exists in politics today around the world that only seems to be getting more extreme. Now, don't get me wrong, because I am not saying, and I'm not suggesting, that women be all airy and fluffy and solve it all with a big warm hug. No. And I think that we have seen the double standards and we see what the expectations are of women far too often. You know, life as a woman according to society, what you need to conform to. So this is not about getting women to conform to anything in particular. I mean, how many times have we been told, just smile more often. You know, why aren't you smiling? Or you should dress this way. Or you're too fat, or you're too thin, you know, all of these things that society tells us. So this is really not about that there's a checklist. This is about making it okay to be a woman in politics and to be able to lead like a woman in politics and in society in general. And far too often, what happens is women that are in leadership positions that have to make tough decisions, that are maybe even career-driven, that are ambitious, well, they get labeled, right? Usually, they get labeled. And sometimes these labels, we can own them. There's no problem with owning them, but oftentimes what we say is, we want to be able to live free of these labels and not have the backlash associated with some of them. I remember a particular decision I made that did not sit well with a male journalist, and he took it upon himself to compare me to Vladimir Putin. It's a moment of infamy, I guess. So this is really not about getting women to soften up. This is really just about allowing space for us to be able to express ourselves in the way that is most natural to us. And having these leadership styles, first of all, does not exclude us from being able to lead in a direct and effective way. So don't confuse about that. And you can also combine them with some male leadership traits. So it's not that all women need to act like this and all men need to act like this either, but it is that we have right now in politics sort of the unwritten rule that we have to operate only on one side of the standard, only on these male dominatrix. So that's how you're going to survive. And what I'm suggesting is we need to be able to make the space to have women be able to lead as women. Recent studies have shown us that women have been conditioned to believe that, first of all, to make it either into an executive rank in a company, to be promoted, to make it into a public position, first of all, we have to play nice because we have to be liked. Because if you're not liked, you're not going to make it. But then, once we get there, to be taken seriously and to get to play with the big boys, you have to act tough. And what happens when a woman does this? Because she's been told these are the rules you got to play with. Well, there are backlashes, but the positive spin-off is oftentimes she's seen as capable, she's seen as tough, and what is the term that often is used? She has balls, right? Nobody's ever saying she has a vagina. That's never used. But there is a difference between acting tough and being strong. Women who act tough do not believe in showing emotion. They hold their emotions back and they do not show vulnerability. Maybe the only exception is anger, and the angrier that they express themselves, the tougher they believe they come across. Women who are strong understand their emotions and know the impact that emotions have on their decisions, but are not afraid to show vulnerability. Just don't let the emotions dominate them. Women who act tough believe that they have to have power and domination over people for them to be respected and for people to do what they say. Women who are strong understand that having power over people has nothing to do with effective leadership and look for inclusive and collaborative solutions. Women who act tough use tough language to get their points across, and they don't shy away from insulting, from mocking, degrading other people. Women who are strong use effective language to get their points across and do that in a very direct way, but without having to attack or insult. So do you see the difference? Acting tough has never led to effective leadership ever, anywhere. But being strong most certainly has. Now, of course, it's not just women that do that sometimes, or women that can display those traits, both the acting tough and being strong. Of course, men can. And I think that we can identify men that also embrace a combination of those leadership styles, and I think that they deserve our support as well. The message has been, though, to politicians for forever. You have to have thick skin and broad shoulders to handle all the messiness of politics. So implicitly what we're saying is politics is aggressive and it is messy, and for you to fit into that, you have to adapt. It is never, how about let's see how we can change it. It is always, this is the way it is. And you coming in have to change the way you are. And this is where I believe women are staying out. Because a lot of women that are capable, some men for that matter, would look at that and say, you know what, no, I would not want to touch that. That does not interest me. The attacking, the insults, I would much rather stay out. And I think that this is the key to being able to get more women into politics. But of course, we can say that. How do we do that? Because it's not going to be just up to the politicians that are willing to do that. It's going to be up to the community at large to reward that, to say it's okay. Because right now, that is not necessarily the message that's coming across. The message is that we still are very comfortable with maybe the more old-style politics, the more male-dominated traits, and that's what's rewarded. That's what gains the most popular interest, right, from us, that makes most headlines. So it is going to be up to all of us to reshape that. And how do we do that? Well, I think awareness that this is an issue. Awareness that this is keeping a lot of women out. We say we want more women in politics, but we need to be able to make that space for them to come in. And I think that as we go through now the next few months where we're going to hear a lot of politicians speak, I think we need to keep in the back of our minds, are they acting tough or are they being strong? And understand that difference. And I think we have to rewrite these unwritten rules that exist. You know, second-generation gender bias is basically different than what maybe our mothers or our grandmothers experienced, which was much more overt. It's very sort of an underlying tone that still exists, and it's hard to put your finger on. And so that is what gives it such, I think, power and longevity, is because it's hard to identify. But we need to just keep this in the back of our minds and be aware, what is it that is keeping systems like it is today? In summary, we need more women in politics. The numbers have shown us that. Why? Because we want to create a balance. It is not just because we want women, and it's not maybe total female domination. That's maybe somewhere in the future. But we need to create that balance between these styles. And we have to create that space, and we need the community to allow that to happen. You know, oftentimes people ask me, what have been the best moments and the worst moments in your political career? Well, I would say that the dark days in politics are probably quite dark, and maybe even more so for women. Because there's three ways to silence, to smear, to neutralize a woman in politics. The first is to sexually defame her, to throw her moral reputation into question. The second is to paint her as an airhead, a dummy, less than apt for the job. She doesn't know what she's talking about. The third is to link her to corruption. And in my 7.5 years, I've been falsely accused of all of those. There have been stories in all of these areas. But even besides all of that, I think that the darkest of the days are any days that your children are mentioned. And for a woman, perhaps, that's even more so. So that's sort of like a weakness that we would have. And this happened to me in 2013 when one of those false stories that was made by political opponents, sometimes people believe and whatever they hear or they read, and somebody believed something that was falsely written about me, and they took it upon themselves to write me a letter, deliver it at home, that said that they would harm my children. And at that moment, you kind of go, as a woman and as a mother, you say, what am I doing in this? Why would I want to put myself or my children in it? But that is the purpose of these tactics. It's to instill fear. And it is a symptom of the dysfunctional parts of a political climate that must change, that we can change. And the sad part is that this has all been perpetrated actually by the hands of other women. And so you wonder, well, how can that be? Because there aren't very many of you. You're turning against each other. Well, if you put crabs in a bucket, you know that you don't need to put a lid on it. because as soon as one starts climbing higher, the other ones pull them down. And this has been a symbol for women's rise and upward mobility in society, is that, you know, we live in a patriarchy still. And patriarchy is really good at not only keeping women outside of the public sphere, but also getting women to turn on each other. And so it becomes all about competition. And there aren't very many spots for women, so we need to eliminate each other. And I think it's only until when we start to unite across the aisle, across political ideologies, but unite women together towards common goals, that we will see the fundamental changes that we need to see. And I think that this is possible. This is possible. And we see it around the world happening right now, and I think that it's very possible for it to happen here. You know, for all the darkness that I just described, politics has been, I think, very meaningful. And I am certain that, you know, the good days absolutely outnumber the bad days. And I'm certain that there are women in politics today, women that aspire to be in politics, that can make these changes. And we need to simply support them. Now, I'm not suggesting all women only vote for women, men vote for men, no. But I would say we need to keep in the back of our minds the importance of this. And I don't know, you know, what the future holds for me, other than probably be spending more time in my pajamas when I finish this job. Might brush my hair a little fewer times, but I would say that, you know, we need to be aware of this, and once we're aware of this, we can change it. Elections are 198 days from today. And I look forward to seeing the rise of women in politics. I look forward to seeing female leadership come to light in full force, and women take their rightful place beside men who understand the value and the importance of this. And I leave you today with a quote from a man that understood this abundantly, who said, "Let us realign forces. Let us ensure that women have a significant part in the decision-making process. We have been excluding women. What we need is a revolution led by women." I think women ought to be saying to us men, "You have made a mess. Just get out and let us in." Thank you.